two, three. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back. Oh, it's root for the Cubbies. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game.
This is the Monday Morning Quarterback on the 28th of January, 2019, from WBRN Radio and on the Bostonred Network. We always pay homage on Monday morning to our former broadcast partner, the late Jerry Pippin, which we have named our broadcast booth after. We'll talk today about the shutdown, the effects of the shutdown, some of the economics involved in the Trump administration from the National Association of Business Economists. Incidentally, reminding you that we have a Numbers Man presentation. That is our economics program. You can find it on the Bostonred Network and WBRN Radio also. And we're working on an open source report. These little programming notes here. We'll start off with the kickoff of Kamala Harris. She's the senator from California. She kicked her campaign off in Oakland, California. We'll listen to a little bit of it. We'll not have the talk shows here, but we'll kind of skip around a little. We'll start out with the national anthem, a little bit of it at least.
We hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red flags above bursting in air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say that star-spangled
Sounds like a gospel choir here kicking back in. We'll do a little skipping around here. We're looking at this presentation as we move along here a little bit. And this kickoff, of course, coming from Oakland, California,
read it someplace.
where she served as state's attorney or attorney there. I'm not really certain what's going on here. This is over an hour-long event, so
We just love.
seems like a jazz band here in downtown Oakland. Over 20,000 people were at this event. Here's Kamala Harris.
Of Oakland. Oakland. Are we proud that we are Kamala Harris's hometown?
I'm sorry, this is not Kamala Harris. Somebody introduced
Are we
Kamala
proud that this is where she launched her career as a fighter for justice? And I know that Oakland is proud that she is our kind of leader because she has got those Oakland progressive values and a vision of inclusion that includes everybody, no matter your identity, no matter your background. Oakland is where Kamala Harris started her career fighting for the people. She was one of the earliest leaders to fight human trafficking, and to invest in re-entry. She was one of the earliest...
We'll move from this. We're sort of moving on here. Her slogan, Kamala Harris for the people, and was launched on a Sunday. Let's see if we can find the people here. Kamala Harris finally coming to
I'm talking about things that I know.
Kamala Harris finally. I had read earlier that this was just a few blocks from where she grew up and about a mile from where she was the state's attorney. In other words, a prosecutor type. And we'll listen to about a minute or two of this.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Kamala Harris evidently had a long journey from Oakland to the Attorney General of California and the U.S. Senator from California. She's a graduate.
Let me start. I want to thank Libby
Howard
Shaft, the
University
great
in
mayor of
Washington,
the city of Oakland. Can we hear it for Libby? And that incredible introduction and our long-standing friendship. You know, our mothers were friends together also here in Oakland, and I can't thank you, Libby, enough for your leadership and your friendship. So here we are, here we are. Here we are. Well, let me tell you, I am so proud to be a daughter of Oakland, California. And as most of you know, I was born just up the road at Kaiser Hospital. And it was just a few miles away that my parents first met as graduate students at UC Berkeley, where they were active in the civil rights movement. And they were born half a world apart from each other. My father, Donald, came from Jamaica to study economics. My mother, Shamala, came from India to study the science of fighting disease. They came here in pursuit of more than just knowledge. Like so many others, they came in pursuit of a dream. And that dream was a dream for themselves, for me, and for my sister Maya. As children growing up here in the East Bay, we were raised by a community with a deep belief in the promise of our country and a deep understanding of the parts of that promise that still remain unfulfilled. We were raised in a community where we were taught to see a world beyond just ourselves, to be conscious and compassionate about the struggles of all people. We were raised to believe public service is a noble cause and the fight for justice is everyone's responsibility. In fact, my mother used to say, "Don't sit around and complain about things, do something." And basically, I think she was basically saying, you've got to get up and stand up and don't give up the fight. And it is this deep-rooted belief that inspired me to become a lawyer and a prosecutor. It was just a couple of blocks from this very spot, nearly 30 years ago, as a young district attorney, I walked into the courtroom for the first time and said the 5 words, that would guide my life's work. Kamala Harris, for the people. Now, I knew our criminal justice system was deeply flawed, but I also knew the profound impact law enforcement has on people's lives and its responsibility to give them safety and dignity. I knew I wanted to protect people, and I knew that the people in our society who are most often targeted by predators are also most often the voiceless and vulnerable. I believed I believed then, as I do now, no one should be left to fight alone.
Kamala Harris, her announcement, President of the U.S. Now, her announcement's a little bit different from Elizabeth Warren, who has an exploratory committee out there. And she is exploring, but she also has better recognition than Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris trying to separate herself from being a prosecutor, some would say a persecutor, in Oakland, California, trying to put it in the best light as the criminal justice system being protectors of the people, in more of a situation that Elizabeth Warren is in terms of predatory lenders, etc. Now, we didn't hear the whole speech, but once again, her situation is a little bit different, and if you notice, she framed it in terms of her diversity within her background, her mother being from India, because a lot of Indians are voting out there, and her father from Jamaica. But and there's some of that, but primarily as an African American, she is a graduate of Howard University, and her parents went to Berkeley. The roots are in Northern California, in Oakland, and in Berkeley. Father being an economist, mother being a researcher. So thus that is her background. Her background there in Oakland, that she's culturally attuned to the African American community, and some of the things that she is presenting there. Now, as far as people that are running, there's Twitter King Booker, the senator from New Jersey, and he was in South Carolina trying to get as many African American votes as possible. South Carolina is a state that the Democratic Party there is a party of the followers of O.J. Simpson. Over 40% of that party in South Carolina. So when you start looking at some of the primary caucuses start out in Iowa, there'll be basically 4 or 5 seats out of Iowa. We look at our own Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and we don't know. Beto O'Rourke has been touring the U.S. Basically by himself, doing groups, listening tour of his own, a different type of campaign. He would do well in Iowa. And then you have Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota, a border state there that probably will have one of the 4 or 5 seats out of Iowa. And then we move on to New Hampshire. That is New England. Elizabeth Warren is there, better known than some of the others. Who else will be there? There are a lot of other candidates running. The fellow out of South Bend, Indiana there, he's running for vice president. Then you have Julian Castro out of San Antonio, Texas, one that's been around. But this Kamala Harris, Donna Brazile was casting her as a Hillary Clinton type, not a good way to be cast. She's been criticized as a corporate type. Of course, you get to Twitter King Booker, who has a following amongst so-called liberals. Going to be an interesting contest there as to how much room these candidates have. When you leave these early primary states, and she goes into South Carolina, of course, she has networking with African fraternities, which will help her in places like South Carolina and in the South. Very similar to what Hillary Clinton done. But the difference there, of course, now is California, where Hillary Clinton did well, robbed Bernie of some of the votes in California. But that primary will be earlier. And Kamala Harris will do extremely well in California and some of the larger states. So it's going to be a very interesting contest. Now with Beto O'Rourke in there, a man that appeals to the common person, it's going to be an interesting contest if he in fact comes in. And Elizabeth Warren, she's staking out territory already. She's been in Iowa and in New Hampshire. She will no doubt go to South Carolina, but right now Bernie is there trying to do what he can do, and Twitter King Booker. It's going to be very, very crowded. So depending on, we've seen some early polling there. Joe Biden, we don't want to forget Joe Biden. Has the most name recognition. But back to our article here, and we'll leave this and go to E.J. Dion. This is from the Los Angeles Times. Mason and, let's see, Burbank. Mark Burbank and Melinda Mason. Before Kamala Harris' campaign launched on Sunday for her nascent 2020 bid, had already hit full gallop, as they call it. Interesting story there. She was on Good Morning America and self-reported a seven-figure fundraiser. Well, we've seen some of her fundraisers there. In fact, we had to disband her fundraisers. Anyway, from fast start, stroke to perception, that she's just not an elite candidate, but amongst the Democratic first runners, a designation that's loaded with both upside and danger in the very early stage of presidential jockeying. And California's Senate, her campaign strategists aren't yet declaring her the favorite, but her day-long debut and crafted for maximum impact, no doubt about that. And this is what you do. This is from Mike Murphy. He's a Republican strategist with extensive experience in candidate rollout. You announce, then you try to create a measure of success. No doubt you have 20,000 people out there. That's a measure of success to get the press to write you as a front runner. Harris's political celebrity was evident at the Sunkist rally there in Oakland. And it was live nationwide coverage on some of the cable networks. Of course, it also was National Hockey League weekend. Anyway, she used her 30 minutes of remarks to lay out a liberal agenda calling for expanded access to health care, preschool, and a college education, above all, to invest against the DJ Trump in the direction he's led the country. We are now at an inflection point in the history of our world, Harris said, looking at the multi-ethnic sea of listeners on the steps of the Oakland City Hall. We are here because the American dream and our American democracy are under attack, and the lines like never before. The front runner, she's 54 years old. I think we talked about that. And go to Joe Biden and, of course, to Senator Bernie Sanders, both of whom are weighing their own bids. Anita Dunn, and she was in the Obama campaign, and she was one time with Hillary Clinton. said while she wouldn't consider any one candidate a front runner at this point, Harris is, the last week, proved she belongs to the top tier. They're already tiering of people here. She is 2 years into her first term as a Democrat to beat. One could make a compelling argument that she is the front runner out of the gate. That's from Dan Pfeiffer. He was the communications director for Barack Obama. He said on Twitter, statements was echoed by Rachel Monroe on the MSNBC there. I will just say honestly, I think there's a good chance that you're going to win the nomination. Anyway, that's strange. She visited South Carolina, her first trip in the early primaries since formally entering the race, during a warm reception. We talked about this Alpha Kappa Alpha. That's an African-American sorority. She joined at Howard University. This does not hurt her. But in some of the more activist states, it doesn't exactly compel her out there as a state's attorney. Harris's record as a Bay Area prosecutor and California Attorney General has already produced a backlash among some Democrats who accuse her of being overly aggressive and contributed to mass incarceration of young African Americans. So this is kind of an interesting situation the way this is laid out. They mentioned Walter Mondale, Brother Kerry, and Hillary Clinton all weathered a serious upstart opposition from Gary Hart. Well, Gary Hart was around for a shorter period of time. Howard Dean imploded, and Bernie Sanders was raw. Each hung on to eventually win the nomination. This is kind of interesting how they are featuring her. For Harris, the question for Harris, John said, is how she builds her campaign's strong beginning. Her strategies are prepared for a momentum to ebb and flow as the race progresses. The high-octane start means to convey energy around the candidate. Will likely downside, pacing Harris to complete the marathon. Well, this is interesting. Harris is not evidently, I've not heard her speak. Heard her doing some questioning. She's a good speaker as far as speakers are concerned. Sort of along the line of Hillary Clinton, perhaps a little more exciting than Hillary Clinton is. Probably not the policy wong that Hillary Clinton is around there, and Hillary Clinton is a name we don't forget, because that monster could be hiding somewhere. She has a tendency to slip out, as they say, the box. We'll start this off now with E.J. Dionne. We usually have him once a week. The real wall is between conservatism and fresh ideas. It's kind of an interesting situation there, putting forth fresh ideas. Where are the fresh ideas? Let me just start this up. I think I'll pinch this. The contest for 2020 Democratic presidential nominations seems to have little relation to the madness that engulfed the nation's capital over the government shutdown. But there is a much closer relationship between Washington's meltdown and the campaign than you might think. You also hear lots about Democrats veering left. We've heard lots about that. This, too, misses the point. What we're actually seeing is a shift in the intellectual energy of American politics. This is a lesson of the disarray in the Republican Party and the ultimate capitulation, and we've seen some from the monopoly press, of President D.J. Trump in the shutdown fight that he initiated. Trump's decision to close the government in a vain pursuit of an essentially meaningless goal showed a party and an ideological movement lost in the wilderness. Well, the whole scheme is in the wilderness in itself. We are actually seeing a shift in the intellectual energy of American politics. This is the lesson of disarray in the Republican Party And, oops, sorry about that, rereading that. I don't have it on teleprompter tonight. Trump's rise itself was a symptom of this traditional conservative nauseum of tax cuts for the best off, and business-friendly deregulations were not answering the need of the less affluent. Republicans, frustrated, they embraced Trump's nationalism and protectionism, along in many cases with his radicalized appeal. They also noticed that Trump defended key social insurance programs such as Social Security, Medicare, which serves an aging Republican base. There's no doubt about this. And perhaps as Trump has stuck resolutely to old conservatism, with corporate tax cuts being his major achievement. That's something they've talked about in tax cuts in general. His administration is a coterie of millionaires and billionaires whose insensitivity to shut-down victims suggests a worldview inspired by the French Bourbons. That's kind of interesting here, not the prairie populace. Well, no doubt about that. The jet set, or whatever you want to call them, people have been hanging around Palm Beach, Florida, and Palm Springs, California. The Koch brothers come to mind. In the meantime, liberals and the left have absorbed the key lessons from Trump's insurgency. One of them is that the progressive movement, seen as speaking primarily for affluent metropolitan areas, will never command a doable majority. Another is that there's room for broader political thinking, given the disconnect in the country with unevenly shared economic growth. There's been a lot of talk about that, but when you talk about elite metropolitan areas, well, an example we'll give New York. Yes, there's been this goal from Los Angeles to Seattle, a smaller city, to Boston, to New York, to create much more of an elite enclave, no doubt about it. And that has risen in many cities in the forms of higher real estate prices. You can go to a place like Nashville, Tennessee, or other places well, we don't want to get tourist travel like Miami, Florida, but we go to, well, let's stand in places like Cleveland, but let's go to a working class enclave like Chicago. Higher prices of real estate there, higher rents, etc. And all of these cities have tried to redo their urban and downtown areas into these elite enclaves. Now, that's a different situation. But there are better jobs, better education opportunities there, and fewer people of color. And also, at the same time, the working class in many of these cities have been relegated to the suburbs and more than likely the extraburbs. And then, of course, we have the rural population out there that's just been relegated. DJ Trump played to that population. And why did he do this? Simple reason: you have the Idahos and North, South Dakotas of the world. These rural territories, they all have 2 senators. So you get those. Very easy to do that. And singing the song "Rally Around the Flag," boys and girls rally around the flag. Same thing as Kamala Harris did with her kickoff. So in other words, there's no difference. There's similarities there. With E.J. Dionne being the classic liberal, there's this idea, well, we bring in through a few Clinton-esque type Democrats here, and we kind of rebalance the scale, rebalance some of the thinking. But is it a rebalance of the thinking? If we look at an issue now, Venezuela and the Bolivarian revolution there, and the nations that have lined up, the old Wilson type foreign policy. We have France, who is in turmoil. We have the UK, which has Brexit, and they're in turmoil. DJ Trump had a shutdown, Comandante Mundros is correct about this. All these characters are on the edge themselves. And this is a little different from Republican orthodoxy. What we have here is a different situation. The global situation is such, and particularly with these industrial capitalist powers, they're all on the edge. And then you hear the quote-unquote R word popping up in the U.S. here. So in other words, the sea is rough. But the Democrats, we have, let's get the Republicans first, Marco Vegas Rubio. And then we have a Democrat like Senator Mendez. He escaped his indictment out of New Jersey. All these characters are coming out for the Trump administration's policy on the coup, and that's all it is, in Venezuela. Let me finish this up here. What is interpreted as a leftward lunch could be better seen as an effort to pull the entire political spectrum away from the premise that has dominated American politics. And this is kind of interesting here. Since Reagan, these gravitational pulls extended gravitational pulls on Barack Obama and Bill Clinton. Well, I would separate those presidencies there. But yes, and part of this was the fear of the Democratic Party to move to truly, as the late great Jerry Pippin called it, the center. Barack Obama's administration at one time, would have been the old timers like Jerry, as a prototype of I Like Ike, the 50s, pretty much. In other words, Eisenhower had a moderate administration. Barack Obama had a moderate administration. Of course, obviously the difference, the Civil Rights Act had been passed by Lyndon Johnson. But it was not a Lyndon Johnson activist administration. You couldn't compare the two at all. Not even with Jimmy Carter, which Jimmy Carter was seen as a moderate at the time. That was before Reagan. All of this has changed. And Bill Clinton being a centrist type person, you could say center right. And this is one of the things we warning signs about Kamala Harris coming up here. Presidential candidates, those thinking of running, other Democratic politicians, are also responding to the party's vacuum on the right, embodied by the shutdown for a symbol. For starters, supply side economics is yesterday. Well, they tried it here, and we'll get to it in a minute here. There is a room to talk about the wealth tax proposed by Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren is no doubt the champion of economic reform, and Bernie Sanders. Middle class and working class tax cut, that's where Kamala Harris came in there. And Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York has inspired serious debate. Only imagine a few years ago about a 70% tax on people that make over $10 million. Very few of those running around the U.S. here. And then we have Sherrod Brown out of Ohio, the dignity of work. He's running for vice president, making a case for the priority of labor over capital. Then we have this guy, Peter, I can't pronounce his name, Bostonred or something, out of South Bend, Indiana, to reclaim the concept of freedom. Oh, well. And Kristen Gillibrand, we won't forget about Kristen Gillibrand. She's from upstate New York, making universal paid family leave a centerpiece for her presidential candidate. And poor Julian Castro, who couldn't get his rolling out. During Jimmy Carter's administration in the late 70s, conservatives launched an intellectual revolution, but left liberals gasping for breath, and helped create the presidency of Reagan. They did this because they had the resources and also the time and the intellectual, I won't say intellectual dexterity, I'll say the cunning dexterity to bring it forward. And then came the lies, now called fake media, but it was around at that time also. And appealing to the nativist element in American politics. Now it's much more pronounced. We just have nationalism, fascism in the White House and forget about it. But this tells you the desperate situation that industrial capitalism is in. This is why you see the Kamala Harrises out there, as as Barack Obama would say, trying to bamboozle people. And I notice a lot of these characters here are trying to push this scheme over there. We'll see how it succeeds. Let's move on here. Check the time here. So we're running a little. Oh, we're not doing too badly. Let's see. We're shut down is over. Some federal workers still can't afford diapers as they wait for their pay. This is pathetic. Partial government, for the word part. This is incidentally the Washington Post. Married to a small group, including 1,000 of diapers off a truck that's at Reagan Airport Sunday morning. Donations that aim to help the Transportation Security Administration workers and others who have not received a paycheck. Federal workers will likely have to wait until late next week to get paid after missing 2 paychecks in January. The pause in cash flow has left many relying on food banks, unable to afford life's basic necessities, including diapers, oh boy, tampons, max pads, and other adult and tenuous products. Oh boy. At least 20 diaper banks across the country have provided diapers and various other feminine supplies. It calls here diaper banks started to receive calls for help in mid-January. The entries became more and more desperate the longer the shutdown was on. Well, there's more than just people involved in the shutdown that need diapers. The Greater D.C. Diaper Bank, I never heard of that. Babies need diapers now. Women need things for their periods. This is pathetic. It really is. Cannon and others from the Diaper Bank spent Sunday morning driving to the region's 3 airports, that's National, Dallas, and so forth. They delivered more than 45,000 diapers to 21,000 period products, and and incontinent products, in other words, so the urine will not flow. Last week, the organization gave more than 40,000 diapers. We won't even get into this. To federal workers and members of the Coast Guard. This is pathetic. This is just terrible. I can't even read any more of this. This is beyond. The Diaper Bank of North Carolina. I think they used to include diapers at food shelves, but not have exclusive diaper banks. Well, we went to a new low here. Now, this is from the federal contractors that was still held hostage here. Tells the story of an individual that graduated from Howard University, and one of these $7,000 a month medications for multiple sclerosis. The person hadn't been able to get it. Morgan called her boss. This is the president of Unispec Enterprises. This is the Harvard character. And told her that the shutdown had left him unable to pay the premiums. Soon all 75 workers from this Unispec technical writers, data analysis, and economists, most of whom have their coverage through the firm, would learn of the lapse in the email. Wesley McCure is the founder and president there of this. And the shutdown, Morgan, 62, is reporting back to her job on Monday as administrative planner for Pipeline and Hazardous Waste Safety Administration. This is unfortunate. This in itself is a outsourced job. But the mile maker of reopening, the mile marker, reopen federal offices, believes the continual suffering and long-term financial damages of the legions of federal contractors who lost wages may never be reimbursed. In the case of Unispec, health insurance remains in limbo. How the shutdown has so quickly shredded the personal safety net of Unispec's workers reflects the razor-thin profit margin, unsettled nature of the business for government contracting firms and their workers. Something to know. Unlike the 800,000 plus government workers who have been promised a back pay. One solution to this, and Congress should look at this immediately since they created this monster of reimbursing these contractors and taking some of the funds away from that so-called wall and put it in a special fund so they can get these people paid. Unispec cannot pay its workers until it has billed the federal government and received payments for the work. They can expedite this work. In fact, old DJ Trump can sign an order to do it. It will take another 4 weeks. February 28th, before Morgan is eligible to receive a complete paycheck, McCure said. And the government's temporary reopening, there's no certainty. Trump has set a deadline of February 15th. In other words, they could have another close down very quickly here. This Morgan's the husband, returned home on the 19th of January, but his supply of costly medication that keeps his multiple cirrhosis, in check, a drug covered under her plan, will last only until Friday, although Medicare pays for some of his medical expenses. Not all, evidently. He's going to have to go on Medicaid now. A 27-year-old analyst is paying only half of his January utility bills, fearing that he otherwise might be unable to afford his antidepressant. 35-year-old writer with asthma and a history of pneumonia canceled her gym membership. I mean, these stories going on and on. Anyway, this McClure is a graduate of Howard University, entered the workforce himself as a government contractor. He decided in his 30s to start a business, a goal since high school, and Unispec evidently was the word he came up with. Over 15 years, McClure banked on the promise that the government would always pay up. Well, yeah. They pay up, but it does take time to do it. I remember in the early days of Cranston, we applied for quite a few government contracts, and we didn't get the government contracts, but we did get money for applying. Anyway, for a time, one contract with the Federal Aviation Service for 125 office workers had pushed his payroll to over 100, and then last year, Unispec was underbid and lost the FAA contract. With the company bleeding money on overhead, it moved out of its office into a closet effectively there. He downsized a WeWork office space. Unispec was not prepared for the complete interruption of its cash flow and moved out on its way to bankruptcy. When it came time for Unispec's holiday party, 5 days before the shutdown, he announced the raises and bonuses, expecting he would be reimbursed before the new year. With his corporate credit line, well, he did have $1 million corporate credit line, almost maxed out, no revenue for nearly the last 2 months of work. The government shut down on the 22nd. In early January, he was scrambling to keep Unispec afloat. Rents, liability insurance, health care premiums all came in, business loans, even a LinkedIn bill. He used his personal American Express card to pay creditors who would accept it. He said, a father of 5, he pays he plans no paycheck for himself, and he placed the mortgage on his family's one-story Maryland house in forbearance. Oh. So in other words, poor old McClure here could become even homeless. He can't cover the company's $60,000 monthly premium to First Care Blue Cross and Blue Shield. He's attempted to persuade the company they aren't listening, and that's one of the problems there. There needs to be some legislation to work out these federal contracts. He wrote the employees could be reimbursed for health care costs after coverage is restored, a benefit based on conversations he had with the insurer, And he ended the email with this pains me to send. I only hope this is over soon. Well, he doesn't know. Anyway, on Friday, hours after Trump and the lawmakers came, First Care issued a news release saying it would work with members to potentially provide relief. And McClure said he received a call from the company inquiring about how it might help. Well, maybe they'll give him some help. There's a lot of pressure out here on these companies because in the Washington area, they do a lot of business with the federal government. The federal government maintains a no comprehensive database of contract workers paid with federal dollars. The Washington Post analysis found 10,000 companies have active contracts with the federal government. At some point during the shutdown, more than 6,000 of those are considered small businesses. That's a lot of small businesses. During the shutdown, 2 Unispec workers left for the private sector. McClure said, I'm surprised more don't. He said he is concerned that even speaking publicly about the hardship of Unispec could hinder his ability to hire workers and win contracts. Probably so. And this is the unfortunate situation when you don't have the financial wherewithal. We did Kamala Harris. We won't appear there anymore. And on the Venezuelan opposition, we'll do the sports here. There's Juan Guaido here. He's trying to plot a scheme here, and they've changed it. This is from the Washington Post, incidentally. Appointe Valora and I won't even try to pronounce Rachel's last name. Anyway, the opposition is in talks with sympathetic military and civilian officials in a bid to overthrow President Nicolas Maduro. Now they're using this now. Self-proclaimed interim president Juan Guaido said in the interview with the Post, backed by the U.S., a host of Latin American lackeys, Guaido and his opposition are locked in a high-stakes game to drive Maduro out of power. In Caracas, the top brass and defense ministers swore their allegiance. In fact, there's a picture of President Maduro and his wife in a tank. He's in a tank driving the tank, and his wife is there by his side. He's in an amphibious vehicle. He was also running, literally, and he's a big man, with soldiers at the barracks, and so he's not going anywhere soon. Guaido has argued that Maduro is illegitimate. Well, and he's self-proclaimed. He's an industrial engineer. He declared himself. He didn't even have. That's strange. He didn't even waste time and having anyone just swear him in. He could have had a lackey do that. Alberto Rivero. He's a Venezuelan. It's a general in exile here. They had some colonel was a military attaché. He gave him some money, and he gave him in exile. Said he's spoken with high, middle, and lower military officers who find fault with Maduro, but remain fearful of a full break. He'll be out of the game. Many soldiers are desperate. Rivero said the armed forces are broke already. Not that broke. And some in the slums residents approached anti-Maduro residents. Now, these people are handing out pamphlets, a joke. Or actually people being paid by the right wing, handing out flyers with amnesty pledges to encourage the guards to turn against Maduro. One guard burnt a paper as he shouted, "Soldier, my friend, you're the only one missing." Anyway, Guaido seeks to establish a transitional government. He says he's in the process of naming foreign representatives. He'll get those in there. They've accepted somebody named Carlos Vichizo an exile opposition leader. He's a lackey here. Now, this is where we were talking about earlier here. Marco Vegas Rubio, we'd expect him to. But Richard Durbin, he's from Illinois, the senator, and Robert Mendez, he was the fellow that reelected after being indicted, and he barely escaped their influence peddling. History of U.S. military involvement in Latin America has raised questions about whether the White House would direct a military invasion to Al's Comandante Nicolas Maduro. Trump has said that all options on the table. They always say that all options on the table, and very well could happen. I mean, it's happened before, these Banana Republic adventures, as they call them. Period. The U.S. and Venezuela broke diplomatic relations. Maduro responded with an order for U.S. diplomats to leave. Maduro, however, backed off and agreed to allow minimum staffs in the embassy for 30 days as the two sides negotiate on more limited interest offices. Well, the Venezuelans have, as far as the last reports I read, have left the U.S. behind. There's $20 million out there in some bag somewhere that they will distribute to the opposition, which they'll be able to get, biscuits and gravy, so to speak, as LBJ would say. That's from Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and the EU. President Maduro addressed them in his speech, and they will send in some aid, which he has not, aid and trade, to get the IMF to prop them up. The one thing they do have is Citgo Oil, that's a refinery as a Venezuelan company, and is owned also by the Venezuelan oil part of it, by some Russian interests, secure as a source of revenue for Guaido's government, transitional government. Well, they'll be able to pull that off. They had froze those assets earlier. So in other words, they'll be able to do some of that kind of stuff. We'll do the sports. Just one other thing here. This is a survey of business conditions. This is a business economist. I won't read it all, but the results of the January survey of business conditions indicate most recipients don't expect a recession within 12 months, but a few recipients have previously expected robust economic growth in the year ahead. This is from the chief economist. Respondents are nearly unanimous that growth in inflation and adjusted GDP real income will remain positive through 19. 2/3 of the respondents expect growth to exceed 2%. Trump people were talking about 3%. And some of the highlights here. Let's see. Profit margins increased because significantly less. Profit margin increase was significantly less widespread in Q4 of 2018. The share of respondents reported rising profit margins fell to 23%, while 20% reported deteriorating margins. And you kind of read through this. I'll post this. I'm not sure on this program, but I'll get it posted. More than half the respondents, 53%, report a shortage of skilled workers at their firm, and this is an increase from 47%. Roughly 2/3 of respondents report that their firms have either no difficulty hiring experienced workers or no open positions. 22% no, and 19% no open position. We're starting to see more and more of this. A majority, 84% of respondents indicated that 1 year after its passage, and this is the very important thing, came on Reuters, and the reason that the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act has not caused their firms to change hiring or investment plans. This is similar to the 81% in previous surveys. A majority of respondents, 77%, indicated that trade concerns have not caused their firm to change investment, hiring, and pricing plans, a percentage equivalent of that in previous surveys, they say. Now, some of the panelists are raising prices, 36%, and delaying investment, 27%, fairly large. And let's see, we pull anything else out of this. After a year of robust spending, investment cooled a bit. It fell from, 39, this is one of our indexes, to 26 expectations for the next 3 months. Select similarly with from 37 to 20 there. So this is some of their indexes. Employment growth improved modestly in Q4 compared to Q3. This is one of their indexes. The NRI ticked upward to 25 in January from 23 in October, slightly more than one-third. 35% of respondents reported rising employment at their firms over the past 3 months, up 31% from October, while 10% responded falling employment, so forth and so on. Wages and salaries remain strong, rising in January to new all-time high of 58%. Wage increases are likely to remain widespread over the next 3 months. Expect wage costs is very high at 74%. I was talking to someone about they got a raise, so perhaps there are some raises, but there's also some inflationary pressures. Let me just do the sports now, long overdue. National Hockey League was having their all-star games. There are 2 games scheduled tonight. The Jets will be at the Flyers and the Devils at the Penguins. There's a big league here. The best and the worst of the all-star weekend, it kind of passed over. It was in San Jose. They split it into 2 teams, it looks like here. And they had the fast skaters competition. Nathaniel McKinnon, I guess, was the winner of it. Not sure about that. And what else did we have here? Well, not a lot. They evidently were competing with Karma Harris. We didn't hear much about them. Anyway, the winner of the Australian Open, the women's side, was Nakoma Ashikaro. She is from Japan, grew up in New York, has a Japanese mother and an African American father. So she used a Japanese, but she has dual citizenship there. Anyway, in the second set, she was 5-3, and love 40 with a triple point. So that was the women's side of it, and I forget Peter, somebody on the men's side. That's the Australian Open. On to the NBA here. The Cavaliers were at the Bulls in Chicago. It was Cavaliers 104-101 over the Bulls. The Kings were at the LA Clippers. LA Clippers won 22-108. The Bucks were at the Thunder. It was the Thunder 118-112. The Raptors were in Dallas. It was the Raptors 123-120 for the Mavericks. The Magic were at the Rockets in Houston. It was Rockets 103-98. The Jazz were at the T-Wolves, and it was all Jazz 125-111. The Wizards were in San Antonio at 132-119. Mr. Castro, I guess he was in attendance, trying to get a little bit of coverage. Anyway, the Heat and Knickerbockers, the Heat 106-97. The Sun and Lakers in Los Angeles, it was the Lakers 116-101. I didn't see anything here on, I will see, our college basketball types. A little bit of college football. We gave some college basketball scores the other night, so pretty much, I'm not sure why this is probably the football page, no doubt. Sometimes on ESPN it takes a little while to find exactly what we are looking for you. Let me look just a minute here. NCAA softball, NCAA basketball. Well, we go to college sports here. I saw NASCAR. I hadn't heard anybody say anything about NASCAR in so long. I forgot that it exists. Not doing very well anymore. This is a little bit of college ball here. This softball, no. We'll probably cover that later in the baseball season. We're getting a little. We do college baseball around here, but we hadn't had any softball. I mean, you can't do everything. And why I'm seeing all of that? It's annoying. And one of the things we wanted to get into, and I guess perhaps we will eventually do it, is a little bit of the fantasy game. We hadn't gotten into it yet, and I guess we're going to have to wait on our college basketball. We'll get those scores to you later in the week. Nonetheless, this is Bostonred on the 28th of January 2019. We covered Kamala Harris today, a kickoff early in the day in Oakland, California. And now the machinery of the Democratic Party is putting her in the first tier. But so far the polls have, as they say, have not so designated her. Well, over time anyway. Let me just get to real clear politics. I saw one poll out, but I think it was only a poll with some approval ratings here. This is from NBC. DJ Trump is at 43. There's nothing to worry about there. This is today, and on the ABC Washington Post had him at 38, kind of looking at some of these. And on Thursday, Fox had him at 43. That's about where he was. 40 at Reuters. And we won't even get to that one. And early in the week, somewhere early in the week. Well, I guess maybe not early in the week. I thought we had some of these presidential scoreboards in here. We didn't have them in here at all. I was thinking we did. Yeah. Anyway. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Wait a minute here. Yeah. We're not doing any good here. We had some lineups here, but we obviously don't have them. We had some lineups with some of these candidates. This is way back on the 15th here. Joe Biden was obviously ahead of the so-called PAC. And just hadn't seen any sense. They kind of disappeared out of here. Politico, Morning Consult, they had a big poll going here. I looked at it. I guess you'd say to kind of gauge where they're going. There should be another one out this Monday. This is way, way back here. To the point that it's irrelevant. This even has the crosstabs and everything. And I believe we looked at it at one time and forget it. This will do it for us. Have a good week, everyone. We'll talk to you next Monday. And we'll have Harry Carey singing Take Me Out to the Ballpark. We're a little bit later here, but what we'll try to do as we go along, a note, we'll cover other campaigns that we did something for Elizabeth Warren. We'll definitely take care of Bernie. And some of the other candidates, as they move along, we'll still have special polling out of our polling unit. We have not done any polling. But we'll start to model a little bit later here, and we'll also visit Iowa.